3 hours. For 3 hours, Marcus had been gentle, patient, worshipping every inch of her trembling body as if she were made of the most delicate glass. 3 hours of whispered reassurances, of tender kisses that traced paths along her collarbone, of strong hands that somehow knew exactly where to touch to make her forget every warning, every fearful whisper that had followed them for months. And when Sophie finally surrendered completely, when she opened herself to him in every way possible, the world shattered into 1,000 brilliant pieces. Her voice broke as she cried his name, not in pain, but in wonder. In that moment she understood that love doesn't fit into the narrow boxes others try to build around it. If you want to discover how a chance encounter at a Chicago charity gala transformed two people everyone said were impossible into a love story that defied every expectation, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like if you believe that real love finds a way even when the whole world says it won't work. And tell me in the comments what you think makes two people truly compatible. Your presence here matters more than you know. The February wind cut through Chicago's downtown streets like broken glass, sending pedestrians scrambling for warmth in doorways and coffee shops. Sophie Chen stood outside the entrance of the Palmer House Hotel, her small frame nearly vibrating with cold despite the emerald green dress she wore, a dress she'd saved for 3 months to buy. At 27, she was a physical therapist at Northwestern Memorial, known for her gentle hands and infinite patience with the elderly patients everyone else found difficult. Tonight was the annual Chicago Medical Foundation Gala, an event she normally would never attend, but her supervisor had insisted every department send a representative. The massive revolving doors swept her into a world of marble columns and crystal chandeliers, a world so far removed from her tiny studio apartment in Logan Square that it might as well have been a different planet. The ballroom glittered with Chicago's elite, women in designer gowns that cost more than Sophie's yearly rent, men in custom tuxedos discussing investments and property portfolios. She clutched her simple black clutch, feeling suddenly very small, very out of place, very aware that she was probably the only person in this room who took the L train to work every morning. That's when she saw him. Marcus Washington stood near the far wall, and even across the crowded ballroom, Sophie could see why people stared. At 6'8", he dominated the space without trying. His frame broad enough that he made the other men look like boys playing dress-up. He was the star center for the Chicago Bulls, the one sports reporters called unstoppable, the one whose face appeared on billboards across the city. But it wasn't his size that made Sophie's breath catch. It was the expression on his face. A kind of weariness, a loneliness that seemed completely at odds with the crowd of admirers surrounding him like satellites orbiting the sun. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. Something that made Sophie's heart stumble in her chest. Something that made Marcus excuse himself from the conversation he wasn't really having, and begin moving through the crowd with surprising grace for a man his size. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here." His voice was deep, warm, with a hint of amusement that crinkled the corners of his dark eyes. Sophie blinked up at him, her neck actually aching from the angle required to meet his gaze. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels exactly the same way," Marcus smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face from intimidating to almost boyish. "Marcus Washington. And before you say it, yes, I play basketball. No, I don't want to talk about last night's game. Yes, I really am this tall." Despite herself, Sophie laughed. "Sophie Chen. I'm a physical therapist. And before you ask, no, I can't fix your jump shot, but I probably could help with that shoulder you keep favoring." Marcus's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You noticed that? I notice how people move. It's literally my job." She tilted her head, studying him with professional interest. "You're compensating. Probably an old rotator cuff injury you never fully rehabbed because the season didn't give you time." For the first time all evening, Marcus felt truly seen. Not as a commodity, not as a walking highlight reel, but as a person. This tiny woman with intelligent eyes, and a directness that was completely refreshing, was looking at him like he was human. "Would you like to get out of here?" The words left his mouth before he could think them through. There's a diner about 3 blocks away. Best pie in Chicago. Much better company than this circus. Sophie knew she should say no. She knew that a man like Marcus Washington existed in a completely different stratosphere, that this was probably just a momentary impulse he'd forget by morning, that getting involved with someone so far outside her world was asking for heartbreak. But there was something in his eyes, a genuine loneliness that matched the ache she carried in her own chest, that made her nod. I love pie. They slipped out a side entrance like teenagers escaping curfew, and the February wind that had seemed brutal before now felt exhilarating. Marcus shrugged out of his tuxedo jacket and draped it around Sophie's shoulders, the fabric still warm from his body, carrying a scent that was clean soap and something indefinably him. The jacket hung on her like a tent, the sleeves extending far past her hands, and Marcus felt something twist in his chest at the sight. The diner was exactly as promised, a tiny hole in the wall place with cracked red vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone honey. They slid into a corner booth, Marcus's knees hitting the underside of the table, Sophie's feet barely touching the floor even when she sat back. The physical contrast between them was almost comical. So, Marcus said after they'd ordered, apple pie for him, cherry for her. Physical therapy. How does someone end up doing that? Sophie wrapped her small hands around the coffee mug the waitress had brought. My grandmother had a stroke when I was 16. The physical therapist who worked with her was the first person who made her believe she could recover. I wanted to be that person for someone else. There was a simplicity to her answer, an honesty that Marcus found compelling. In his world, everyone had angles, agendas, things they wanted from him. Sophie just was. What about you? She asked. How does someone end up 7 feet tall and playing professional basketball? 6'8". Marcus corrected with a slight smile. And honestly, I didn't have much choice. When you're this size, everyone just assumes basketball is your destiny. Coaches started recruiting me when I was 14. I was good at it, so I kept doing it. But sometimes I wonder what I would have chosen if the choice had actually been mine. The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Marcus never talked like this, never revealed the parts of himself that questioned, that wondered about alternative lives. But something about Sophie, about the way she listened with her whole body leaning slightly forward, made the words spill out. Do you like it? Sophie asked simply. Playing, I mean. Not the fame or the money, just the game itself. Marcus considered this, really considered it. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I do. There's this moment, right before the buzzer, when everything goes quiet in my head and it's just me and the ball and the basket. Everything else disappears. Those moments make everything else worth it. That's how I feel when I'm working with patients, Sophie said softly. When I can see the exact moment they realize they're stronger than they thought, that their body can do things they'd given up on, everything else just falls away. They talked for 3 hours. The pie was forgotten, then eaten, then followed by more coffee. They talked about Sophie's grandmother, about Marcus's mother, who still lived in his childhood home in Atlanta and refused to let him buy her a new one. They talked about the pressure of expectations, about the weight of other people's dreams, about the strange loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who only see what they want to see. Can I ask you something? Sophie said as the diner began preparing to close. People must approach you all the time. Why did you talk to me? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his large hands wrapped around a coffee mug that looked like a child's toy in his grip. Because when you looked at me, you saw my shoulder injury. Not my stats, not my contract, not what I could do for you. You saw me hurting and your instinct was to help. Do you know how rare that is? Sophie felt heat rise in her cheeks. I didn't mean to be rude, analyzing you like that. You weren't rude. You were real. Marcus reached across the table, and his hand, massive and calloused from years of handling a basketball, gently covered both of hers. The size difference was startling. His one hand could encompass both of hers completely, and Sophie felt a flutter of something in her stomach that was part nervousness, part something she didn't want to name yet. "I'd like to see you again," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower, "if you're willing to deal with the circus that comes with being seen with me. It won't be easy. People will have opinions, lots of opinions." Sophie looked down at their hands, at the way his skin, several shades darker than hers, contrasted with her own. She thought about the whispers that would follow, the stares, the assumptions people would make. She thought about the impossibility of it all. This giant of a man and her, barely 5'2", from completely different worlds. "I'd like that too," she heard herself say. When Marcus walked her to her car, a beat-up Honda Civic that was older than her relationship with her best friend, he didn't seem to notice or care. He opened her door with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his imposing size, and when he leaned down to kiss her goodnight, Sophie had to rise on her tiptoes, even as he bent nearly double. The kiss was gentle, questioning, his lips soft against hers. But Sophie could feel the restrained power in him, the careful control he maintained over his own strength. And something about that control made her pulse race. The next 3 months were a whirlwind. Marcus pursued her with a single-minded determination that reminded Sophie why he was so successful on the court. Flowers arrived at the hospital. Not expensive roses, but daisies, because she'd mentioned once that they were her favorite. He showed up at her apartment after away games, sometimes at 2 in the morning, just to see her for 20 minutes before she had to sleep for her early shift. They went to museums during the day when they were less crowded, to small restaurants in neighborhoods where no one recognized him, to late-night movies where they could sit in the back row and Marcus could actually stretch his legs. But the whispers followed them everywhere. Sophie's co-workers had opinions, delivered with false concern that barely masked judgment. "He's so big, Sophie. I mean, have you thought about how that would even work? Someone like him is used to a certain kind of woman. You know, glamorous. Not that you're not pretty, but athletes like him, they have options. Lots of options. Why would he settle for someone so ordinary?" Marcus's teammates were blunter. "Man, she's tiny. You could break her without even trying. Have you thought about that?" Even his mother, when Sophie finally met her during a trip to Atlanta, pulled her son aside. Sophie couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the concern on the older woman's face, the way she gestured between Marcus and Sophie with clear skepticism about the physical logistics of their relationship. The comments ate at Sophie in ways she tried not to show. She found herself researching online, reading forums where people discussed relationships with significant size differences, medical articles about physical compatibility. The more she read, the more anxious she became. Marcus noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Talk to me," he said one night as they sat in his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. "Something's been bothering you for weeks." Sophie curled into the corner of his enormous couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "Do you ever think about what everyone's saying? About how we don't fit?" Marcus moved from his chair to sit beside her, the couch dipping under his weight. "Sophie, look at me," she did, meeting those dark eyes that had become so familiar, so beloved. "I think about it every day," he said honestly. "I think about how I have to be careful every time I hug you because I'm afraid I'll hurt you. I think about how people stare at us like we're a circus act. I think about how you deserve someone who doesn't come with cameras and commentary and constant judgment. But I also think about how you're the first person who ever made me feel like I was more than my height and my jump shot. I think about how you laugh at my terrible jokes, and how you fall asleep during movies but pretend you were awake the whole time. I think about how I've never felt more myself than when I'm with you. So yeah, I think about it. But it doesn't change how I feel." Sophie felt tears burning behind her eyes. What if everyone's right? What if we're just fooling ourselves? Marcus took her hand, so small in his, and pressed it against his chest where she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. Then we'll figure it out together. But Sophie, I need you to hear me. I love you. Not despite our differences, not because I have some size fetish or you have a savior complex. I love you because when I'm with you, I finally feel like I found my home. The place where I fit, even though the world says I shouldn't. I love you too, Sophie whispered, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Then, marry me. The words hung in the air between them. Sophie's eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Marcus slid off the couch and onto one knee, which brought him almost to her eye level, and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. I know it's fast. I know people will say we're crazy. I know there are 1,000 practical reasons to wait. But Sophie, I have spent my entire life being told what I should do, who I should be, what makes sense for someone like me. You're the first thing I've ever chosen just because my heart said yes. Marry me. Not because it makes sense, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Sophie looked at the ring, a simple solitaire that caught the city lights from the window and threw tiny rainbows across the ceiling. She thought about all the warnings, all the doubt, all the very real concerns about their physical compatibility that had been keeping her awake at night, and then she looked at Marcus, this enormous man who held himself so carefully around her, whose eyes held nothing but hope and love and a vulnerability that took her breath away. Yes, she said, and watched his face transform with joy. Yes, I'll marry me. The engagement announcement broke the internet. Sports blogs debated it. Morning shows discussed it. Social media exploded with opinions ranging from supportive to cruel. Sophie's inbox filled with messages from strangers, some offering congratulations, others offering unsolicited advice about everything from wedding night positions to medical procedures she should consider. Marcus's agent called it a publicity nightmare. His teammates threw him a bachelor party and made jokes that made Sophie blush when Marcus told her about them later. Jokes all centered around the same theme of physical impossibility. Her friends threw her a bachelorette party where the conversation inevitably turned to the same concerns, delivered with wine and giggles, but carrying real worry underneath. Have you talked to your doctor? Her closest friend asked. I mean, realistically, Sophie. He's huge. You're tiny. Sex is going to be an issue. We'll figure it out, Sophie said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The truth was, she and Marcus hadn't consummated their relationship yet. It wasn't for lack of desire. The chemistry between them was electric, every kiss leaving them both breathless and wanting more. But Marcus had been adamant about waiting. I don't want to hurt you, he'd said during one particularly heated makeout session that had left them both frustrated. I need to know you're sure, that we've thought this through. Sophie had been touched by his concern even as her body ached with unfulfilled need. But the waiting also gave her anxiety time to grow, fed by every comment, every warning, every expression of concern from well-meaning friends and strangers alike. The wedding was small, just family and close friends in a garden ceremony in early June. Sophie wore a simple white dress, Marcus wore a custom-made tux, and when they said their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. But Sophie could feel the tension underneath the celebration, could hear the whispered conversations about the wedding night, could see the concern in her mother's eyes when she hugged her daughter goodbye. The hotel suite Marcus had booked was beautiful, all soft lighting and rose petals and champagne chilling in a silver bucket. Sophie stood in the bathroom for 20 minutes, wearing the white silk negligee her friends had given her as a gift, trying to calm her racing heart. You can do this, she told her reflection. You love him. He loves you. That's what matters. But when she emerged from the bathroom and saw Marcus standing by the window, still in his dress shirt and pants, looking out at the Chicago skyline with tension visible in every line of his massive frame. All her courage evaporated. "We don't have to do anything tonight," Marcus said without turning around. "I can feel how scared you are. I don't want this to be something you endure. I want it to be something we both want." "I do want it," Sophie said, and her voice barely came out as a whisper. Everyone says it won't work. That you're too big. That I'm too small. That we'll hurt each other trying." Marcus turned then, and the look on his face was so tender it made Sophie's chest ache. "Come here," he said softly. She crossed the room on trembling legs, and Marcus pulled her gently into his arms, lifting her effortlessly so their faces were level. "Listen to me," he said, his deep voice vibrating through her body where she pressed against his chest. "I have been careful my entire life. Careful not to use my size to intimidate. Careful not to hurt people accidentally. Careful to control my strength. With you, I will be more careful than I have ever been. We will go slow. We will stop if anything hurts. We will figure out what works for us, not what works for anyone else. Okay?" Sophie nodded, some of her fear easing at the certainty in his voice. Marcus carried her to the bed as if she weighed nothing, laying her down on the silk sheets with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that large. He stood there for a moment, just looking at her, and Sophie saw something flash in his eyes that made her breath catch. Hunger, yes, but also something deeper. Reverence. "You're so beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "I've been wanting this. Wanting you. For so long. But Sophie, we're going to do this right. We're going to take our time. I need you to promise me you'll tell me if anything feels wrong, if anything hurts. Promise me." "I promise," Sophie whispered. Marcus began unbuttoning his shirt, and Sophie watched as more and more of his body was revealed. She'd seen him shirtless before, at the pool, in photographs, but this was different. This was her husband, and the knowledge sent heat pooling low in her belly. His chest was enormous, defined muscles that spoke of years of athletic training, skin that seemed to glow in the soft lamplight. When he moved to remove his pants, Sophie's eyes widened. The bulge there was proportional to the rest of him, and sudden panic clawed at her throat. "Marcus, I don't think I can." "Shh," he soothed, climbing onto the bed beside her, but not over her, not crowding her. "We're not racing to anything. Let me just touch you. Let me show you how good this can feel." His hands, those massive hands she'd watched handle a basketball with impossible precision, touched her with exquisite care. He traced the line of her collarbone, down her arms, learning the geography of her body with patient attention. Every touch was gentle, questioning, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Sophie found she didn't want to pull away. The fear was still there, but it was being slowly overtaken by something else. Desire. Need, a heat building in her core that made her arch into his touch. "That's it," Marcus murmured, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear. "Just feel. Just be here with me." His mouth traced a path down her neck, his tongue tasting her skin, and Sophie heard herself make a sound she'd never made before. A needy whimper that should have embarrassed her but didn't. Marcus's hands found the hem of her negligee, and he looked at her, asking permission without words. She nodded, and he slowly, so slowly, drew the silk up and over her head, leaving her bare beneath him. "God," he breathed, his eyes roaming over her body with such intensity that Sophie felt it like a physical touch. "You're perfect." His hands cupped her breasts, and Sophie gasped at the sensation. Her breasts disappeared completely in his palms, and the contrast, the visible evidence of their size difference, should have scared her. Instead, it sent a bolt of arousal through her that made her hips lift involuntarily. "You like that?" Marcus's voice was lower now, rougher. You like feeling how big I am compared to you? Yes, Sophie admitted, the word coming out as a moan as his thumbs brushed over her nipples. Marcus's mouth replaced his hands, and Sophie cried out at the sensation of his lips, his tongue, his teeth grazing her sensitive flesh. He was so careful, so controlled, but she could feel the leashed strength in him, could sense how hard he was working to keep himself in check. I want to taste all of you, Marcus said against her skin. I want to learn every sound you make, every spot that makes you shake. Will you let me? Sophie could only nod, beyond words now, her body singing with sensation. Marcus kissed his way down her stomach, his hands spreading her thighs gently. So small, he murmured, almost to himself. I could span your whole thigh with one hand. He did just that, wrapping his hand around her thigh, his fingers easily meeting, and the visual made them both pause. You're sure? He asked one more time. I'm sure, Sophie said, and meant it. When Marcus's mouth found her center, Sophie saw stars. His tongue was skilled, patient, working her with the same focused intensity he brought to everything he did. He learned quickly what made her gasp, what made her thighs tremble, what made her fist her hands in the sheets and cry his name. He brought her to the edge again and again, backing off just before she could tumble over, building the pleasure until Sophie was writhing beneath him, begging for release. Please, she finally sobbed. Marcus, please, I know what you need, he said, and his voice was pure sin. Let go for me, Sophie. Let me see you fall apart. He did something with his tongue, his fingers carefully entering her, stretching her gently, and Sophie shattered. The orgasm rolled through her in waves, pulling cries from her throat that she'd never heard herself make. Marcus worked her through it, gentling his touch as she came down, pressing soft kisses to her inner thighs. Beautiful, he murmured. So beautiful when you come. Sophie lay there panting, her body still trembling with aftershocks. She'd had orgasms before, alone in the dark with her own hands, but nothing like this. Nothing that left her feeling simultaneously satisfied and desperately wanting more. Your turn, she said, reaching for him. Marcus caught her hands, bringing them to his lips. Sophie, we need to prepare you more. I wasn't kidding when I said we need to take our time. Over the next hour, Marcus proved just how patient he could be. He used his fingers, starting with one, then two, stretching her carefully while his mouth worked magic on her body. He brought her to orgasm again and again, until Sophie lost count. Until she was so relaxed and ready that when he finally positioned himself at her entrance, her body opened to him. Look at me, Marcus commanded as he began to push inside. Keep your eyes on mine. Sophie did, and the intensity in his gaze held her as surely as his hands on her hips. There was pressure, yes, an impossible fullness as he slowly, incrementally worked himself inside. But there was no pain, just a stretching that bordered on too much but never quite crossed that line. Breathe, Marcus coached, his own breathing ragged with the effort of control. Just breathe, baby. You're doing so well. Taking me so well. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his massive arms trembling with the strain of holding himself back, of not just plunging forward like every instinct in his body was screaming at him to do. Sophie focused on his eyes, on the love and concern and barely restrained desire she saw there. She wrapped her legs around his waist, or tried to. They didn't quite reach, and pulled him deeper. Marcus groaned, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. Sophie, if you do that, I won't be able to control, then don't, she said, surprised by her own boldness. I trust you. I want all of you. Something in Marcus's control snapped. He drove forward, sheathing himself completely inside her in one smooth thrust, and Sophie's back arched off the bed as she cried out. Not in pain, but in shock at the sensation of being so utterly filled, so completely possessed, so perfectly joined with this man she loved. Did I hurt you? Marcus froze, his entire body rigid with tension. Tell me I didn't hurt you." "No," Sophie gasped. "No, it's so much. You're so much. I feel like I can't breathe, like you're everywhere inside me." "Do you want me to stop?" "Don't you dare," Sophie said fiercely, and Marcus's laugh was breathless with relief. He began to move then, slow, careful thrusts that had Sophie seeing stars. The angle, the depth, the feeling of his massive body over hers, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. Every nerve ending in her body seemed to be firing at once, pleasure building in waves that threatened to drown her. "You feel incredible," Marcus groaned. "So tight around me. Like you were made for me. Only me." "Faster," Sophie begged, her nails digging into his broad shoulders. "Marcus, please, faster." "I don't want to hurt you," he said, but his hips were already speeding up, his control fraying at the edges. "You won't. You couldn't. Please, I need." Marcus shifted his angle slightly, and Sophie screamed as he hit something inside her that sent electricity through her entire body. "There?" he asked, doing it again. "Is that what you need?" "Yes, oh God, yes. Right there, please don't stop." They found a rhythm. Fast, and desperate, and perfect. Marcus's size meant he could angle her body however he wanted, could lift her hips to meet his thrusts, could hold her in place as he drove into her again and again. And Sophie, rather than being overwhelmed by his strength, found herself reveling in it. Found herself safe in the knowledge that he would never let her fall, never let her get hurt, would always be in complete control even when he was losing control. "I'm close," Marcus warned, his voice strained. "Sophie, I'm so close. I need you to come with me." His hand found her center, his thumb circling the sensitive bundle of nerves there, and Sophie exploded. The orgasm hit her like a tidal wave, pulling her under, drowning her in sensation. She felt Marcus follow, felt him pulse inside her, felt the warmth of his release as he shouted her name. They collapsed together, Marcus somehow managing to roll so his weight didn't crush her, pulling her against his chest as they both struggled to catch their breath. Sophie's entire body was trembling, aftershocks of pleasure still rolling through her. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked as soon as he could form words. "Did I hurt you? Was I too rough? Was it too much?" Sophie laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Marcus, I don't even have words for what that was. But, hurt? No. Too rough? Definitely not. Too much? Maybe. But in the best possible way." Relief flooded his face, and he pressed kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you so much. I was so afraid I would hurt you." "I love you too," Sophie said, snuggling deeper into his embrace, and for the record, everyone who said it wouldn't work can officially be proven wrong. They lay there in comfortable silence for a while, Sophie's fingers tracing idle patterns on Marcus's chest, his hand stroking her hair. "Sophie?" Marcus said eventually. "Are you too tired for round 2? Sophie laughed and swatted his chest. "Round 2? Marcus, I can barely feel my legs." "I'll take that as a challenge," he said, and the grin on his face was positively wicked. And so began round 2, which was slower, more exploratory, as they learned what angles worked best, what positions allowed Marcus to drive deep without overwhelming her. They discovered that when Sophie was on top, she could control the depth and pace. Watching Marcus's face contort with pleasure beneath her gave her a sense of power that was intoxicating. They found that when he took her from behind, his hand spanning her waist entirely, the angle hit spots inside her that made her see colors that didn't exist. Round 3 was against the wall, Marcus holding her up effortlessly as if she weighed nothing, her legs wrapped around his waist as he drove up into her. Round 4 was in the shower, hot water cascading over them as Marcus made her come with just his fingers and his mouth. Round 5 was back in bed, slow and tender, face to face, whispered love words mixing with sighs of pleasure. Round 6 found them on the couch, Sophie bent over the armrest, Marcus's hands gentle on her hips despite the desperate pace. And round 7, the one that would become their opening story, was different from all the others. By then, Sophie's body was singing with exhaustion and satisfaction. Marcus had been gentle, patient, worshipping every inch of her as if it were the first time and the last. He'd taken his time, learning her body with reverent attention, bringing her pleasure in ways she hadn't known existed. And when she finally surrendered completely, when she opened herself to him in every way possible, trusting him with her body and her heart and her soul, the connection between them transcended the physical. As the first light of dawn began filtering through the hotel windows, Sophie lay in Marcus's arms, her body deliciously sore, marked with the evidence of their night together. Small bruises bloomed on her hips where his fingers had gripped, not from violence but from passion, from the impossibility of his hands knowing their own strength when lost in pleasure. She touched one tenderly, and Marcus's eyes followed the movement with concern. "I hurt you," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "No," Sophie corrected firmly. "You loved me. There's a difference. These aren't injuries, Marcus. They're proof. Proof that what we have is real, that it works, that everyone who said it was impossible was wrong." Marcus pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her temple. "I never want to hurt you. You won't. You didn't. We figured it out, just like you said we would." She looked up at him, at this enormous man who had been so careful with her, so attentive to her pleasure, so determined to make their first time perfect. "Everyone was wrong about us." "Not everyone," Marcus said with a smile. "My mom called while you were in the shower last night. Before, I mean. She wanted to give us her blessing. Said she could see how much I love you, and that was all that mattered." Tears pricked Sophie's eyes. "Really? Really? And she wants to teach you to make her famous peach cobbler when we visit next month." Over the following weeks, as Sophie returned to work and Marcus to training, the evidence of their compatibility became impossible to ignore. Sophie walked with a slight limp for 3 days, something her coworkers noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" one asked with genuine concern. "Better than okay," Sophie replied, unable to keep the smile off her face. The question started almost immediately, delivered with barely concealed curiosity. How did it work? Did it hurt? Was Marcus careful? Sophie kept her answers vague but truthful. It worked because they made it work. It didn't hurt because Marcus was patient and gentle and attentive. He was more than careful. He was perfect. But the proof that mattered most came 3 months after the wedding, when Sophie realized her period was late. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, and Sophie stared at it in her tiny bathroom with a mixture of joy and terror. A baby. She was going to have Marcus's baby. The first ultrasound revealed a healthy fetus, already measuring large for gestational age. "Given your husband's height," the doctor said with professional neutrality that didn't quite hide her amazement, "we'll want to monitor the pregnancy closely. There's a possibility of a larger-than-average baby, which could present challenges given your small frame." Sophie's mother cried when she heard the news. Not happy tears, but worried ones. "Sophie, are you sure you can carry a baby that size? What if it's too big? What if it hurts you?" But Sophie thought about Marcus's hands, gentle on her body. She thought about his patience, his care, his willingness to do whatever it took to make sure she was safe and comfortable and loved. "We'll figure it out," she said with confidence she was only beginning to feel. "We always do." The pregnancy was difficult. Sophie's small frame struggled with the growing baby, just as everyone had predicted. By her 7th month, she could barely walk, the weight throwing off her center of gravity in ways that made her clumsy. Marcus took a leave from basketball, something that shocked his teammates and frustrated his coaches, but he was adamant. "My wife needs me more than the team does right now," he said simply. He was there for everything, helping her into the bath when she couldn't manage on her own, massaging her swollen feet, holding her hair back during morning sickness that lasted well into the 2nd trimester, driving her to every appointment, his massive hand holding her small one as they listened to their baby's heartbeat. The baby was indeed large. At 38 weeks, the ultrasound estimated the weight at over 9 pounds, and Sophie's doctor gently suggested a cesarean section. "Your pelvis is quite small," she explained. "Attempting a vaginal delivery with a baby this size could result in serious injury. I know it's not what you hoped for, but it's the safest option for both you and the baby." Sophie cried that night, hormones and disappointment making her feel like she'd failed somehow. "I wanted to do it naturally," she sobbed into Marcus's chest. "I wanted to prove I could." "You have nothing to prove," Marcus said fiercely. "You're carrying our child. You're growing a whole human being inside your body. You're already the strongest person I know. How you deliver doesn't change that." The cesarean was scheduled for the following week, but their daughter had other plans. Sophie's water broke at 2 a.m, and the contractions started almost immediately. Strong, painful, coming too close together. "Marcus," Sophie gasped, gripping his hand. "Something's wrong. It hurts too much." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Marcus carried her from the car to the emergency room, shouting for help, his face white with fear. The medical team swarmed them, getting Sophie into a wheelchair, rushing her to a delivery room. The doctor examined her quickly, her expression growing serious. "The baby's in distress," she said. "Heart rate is dropping. We need to do the cesarean now. Emergency protocol." Sophie barely had time to process before she was being wheeled into surgery. Marcus, dressed in scrubs that looked comically small on his massive frame, held her hand as the anesthesia took effect. "I'm scared," Sophie whispered. "I'm right here," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "I'm not going anywhere. You've got this. We've got this." The surgery took less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. Sophie, numb from the chest down, could feel pressure and pulling but no pain as the doctors worked. Marcus kept his eyes locked on hers, refusing to look at what was happening beyond the surgical drape, his steady presence the only thing keeping her grounded. And then, suddenly, there was a cry. Not Sophie's, but tiny, outraged, absolutely furious at being pulled from the warm darkness into the bright lights of the operating room. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, and Sophie heard the smile in her voice. "A very healthy, very large girl." "How large?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. 9 pounds, 4 ounces, 22 inches long." The doctor appeared around the drape, holding a squirming bundle wrapped in pink blankets. "Someone wants to meet her parents." They placed the baby on Sophie's chest, and the world stopped. She was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Covered in vernix and blood and beautiful in a way that made Sophie's chest ache. She had Marcus's dark skin and his broad features, but her eyes, when they blinked open, were almond-shaped like Sophie's. "Hi," Sophie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, baby girl. I'm your mama. We've been waiting so long to meet you." Marcus pressed his forehead against Sophie's, one massive hand gently cupping their daughter's tiny head. "She's perfect. You're perfect. God, Sophie, we made an actual human being." The recovery was hard. The cesarean incision hurt, and Sophie's small body took weeks to heal from the trauma of pregnancy and surgery. But Marcus was there for all of it, changing diapers at 3 a.m, walking their daughter in circles around their apartment when she wouldn't stop crying, bringing Sophie water and painkillers, and telling her she was beautiful even when she felt like a wreck. Their daughter, whom they named Maya after Sophie's grandmother, grew quickly. At her 2-month checkup, she was already off the growth charts, in the 99th percentile for both height and weight. "She's going to be tall," the pediatrician said with a smile. "Probably very tall, given her genetics." "Just like her daddy," Sophie said, watching Marcus hold their daughter with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that large. When Maya was 6 months old, Sophie returned to work part-time. Her first day back, she was bombarded with questions from coworkers who'd been following her pregnancy journey. "How was the delivery?" one asked. Sophie smiled, thinking about the cesarean scar hidden beneath her scrubs, about the difficult pregnancy, about the fears and doubts that had plagued her. "It was perfect," she said honestly. "Not easy, but perfect." Just like everything with Marcus. That evening, as Sophie nursed Maya in the rocking chair Marcus had insisted on buying, he came to stand in the doorway, watching them with an expression of such love it took her breath away. "What are you thinking?" Sophie asked softly. "I'm thinking about how everyone said it wouldn't work," Marcus said, coming to kneel beside the chair. "How they said you were too small, I was too big. We were too different. How they said we'd never make it work physically, let alone build a life together." He reached out, his finger barely touching Maya's tiny fist, which immediately grasped it with surprising strength. "And I'm thinking about how they were all wrong. We didn't just make it work. We made it beautiful." Sophie leaned over to kiss him, careful not to disturb their nursing daughter. "We proved them all wrong, every single one of them," Marcus agreed. Over the next year, as Maya grew from infant to toddler, the evidence of their successful union became impossible to ignore. Maya was indeed going to be tall, already in the 99th percentile for her age, with her father's athletic build and her mother's delicate features. She was a perfect blend of both of them, proof that love really could bridge any gap. Sophie's friends, the ones who had expressed such concern about physical compatibility, came to visit and marveled at the family they'd built. "I have to admit," Sophie's best friend said, watching Marcus crawl around on the floor playing with Maya, his massive frame making him look like a giant in a dollhouse. "I was worried. We all were. But you two, you make it look easy." "It's not easy," Sophie corrected. "It's work. It's communication and patience and being willing to figure things out together. But it's worth it. He's worth it." This, she gestured to Marcus and Maya, now engaged in some elaborate game involving stuffed animals and sound effects, is worth it. The second pregnancy came as a surprise 3 years later. Sophie was 31 now, Marcus 42, and Maya was a rambunctious 3-year-old who showed every sign of inheriting her father's height and athletic ability. "Are you scared?" Marcus asked when Sophie told him about the positive pregnancy test. "A little," Sophie admitted. "The last pregnancy was hard. And we know this baby will probably be big too." "We know what to expect this time," Marcus said, pulling her into his arms. "We know what works, what to watch for, and we know we can handle it. This pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others." Sophie knew what to expect from her body, knew the warning signs to watch for. But she was also older, busier chasing after an energetic toddler. Marcus, more protective than ever, insisted she take it easy. The baby, another girl, was born via scheduled cesarean at 38 weeks. She weighed 10 pounds even, bigger than her sister had been, with the same perfect blend of both parents. They named her Grace, and she completed their family in ways Sophie hadn't known she needed. When Maya started kindergarten at 5 years old, already the tallest child in her class by several inches, the other parents stared. Sophie was used to it by now, the double takes when people saw her tiny frame next to Marcus's massive one, the curious glances at their tall, beautiful daughters. At the kindergarten parent-teacher conference, Maya's teacher pulled them aside. "I wanted to talk to you about Maya," she said, and Sophie's heart sank, preparing for bad news. "She's been asking questions. About families, about how everyone looks different. Some of the other children have made comments about how big she is compared to other girls her age, and about how different you and your husband look." "What kind of comments?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Nothing malicious, just curious. Children notice differences, but I wanted to give you a heads up, in case Maya brings it up at home." That night, Sophie found Maya in her room, unusually quiet as she colored. "Baby, can we talk?" Sophie sat on the floor beside her daughter, Grace toddling over to join them. "Am I going to be as big as Daddy?" Maya asked without preamble. "Probably," Sophie said honestly. Maybe not quite as tall, but you're going to be very tall. Is that bothering you? Emma said her mom said it's weird that you're so small and Daddy's so big. She said it doesn't make sense. Sophie took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Well, Emma's mom is right about one thing. Your daddy and I do look very different from each other. He's very tall, I'm very short. His skin is darker, mine is lighter. We come from different backgrounds, different families. So it is weird? Maya's lower lip trembled. No, baby. Different isn't weird. Different is just different, and sometimes, different things go together to make something beautiful. Sophie pulled both her daughters into her lap. You know what makes sense? Love makes sense. Your daddy and I love each other very much, and we love you and your sister more than anything in the world. That's what matters. But Emma's mom said. Emma's mom probably hasn't thought about it that much, Marcus said, coming to sit with them, the four of them making an unusual pile on Maya's bedroom floor. People sometimes say things without really understanding. But here's what I want you to know. He took Maya's small hand in his large one, the contrast visible and striking. Your mama is the strongest person I've ever met, not because she's big or strong like me, but because she has the biggest heart. She chose to love me even when people said it wouldn't work. She chose to have you and your sister even though it was hard for her body. She chooses us every single day, and your daddy, Sophie added, chose to see past what everyone expected of him. He chose to be gentle when he could have been intimidating. He chose to be patient when things were hard. He chose love over what was easy. Maya considered this seriously, her young face thoughtful. So you chose each other? Every day, Marcus and Sophie said in unison, then laughed. Can I tell Emma that? Maya asked. You can tell Emma whatever you want, Sophie said. But mostly, I want you to remember that families come in all different shapes and sizes. What makes us a family isn't how we look. It's how we love each other. The conversation became a regular one as the girls grew. In a world that wanted to put people in boxes, to make everything neat and categorized, their family defied easy description. Marcus and Sophie made sure their daughters knew their story. The real story. Not sanitized, but honest. They told them about the concerns people had raised, about the challenges they'd faced, about the choices they'd made to be together. They told them about the wedding night, in age-appropriate terms that emphasized love and trust and patience. They told them about the difficult pregnancies, about how hard Sophie's body had to work to carry them. They made sure Maya and Grace understood that love isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. By the time Maya was 10 and Grace was 7, both girls were already taller than their mother. Sophie, still petite at 5'2", had to stand on her tiptoes to kiss her daughters goodnight. Marcus found it endlessly amusing, this tiny woman bossing around a family of giants. You know what I realized? Marcus said one night as they got ready for bed, watching through the window as their daughters played basketball in the driveway, Maya already showing signs of her father's court sense. What's that? Sophie asked, brushing her hair. Everyone was so focused on whether it would work physically. They never stopped to think about whether it would work emotionally, mentally, spiritually. They reduced our entire relationship to logistics. And they missed the point entirely. The physical stuff, we figured out. It took patience and communication and trial and error. But we figured it out. But the real work, the real compatibility, that was always about our hearts. About choosing each other. About building a life based on more than just whether our bodies fit together. Sophie turned to look at her husband, this man who had somehow become even more attractive to her with age, gray threading through his hair, laugh lines around his eyes from years of joy. They did miss the point, she agreed. But I'm glad. Let them wonder. Let them question. We know the truth. What truth is that? Marcus asked, pulling her into his arms. That love finds a way. That different doesn't mean wrong, that the best things in life are worth working for. She looked up at him, this man she'd chosen, who'd chosen her back. That sometimes the perfect fit isn't about size or logic or what makes sense to other people. Sometimes it's just about two hearts that recognize each other. Marcus kissed her then, slow and deep, and after 15 years together, Sophie still felt that spark, that electricity that had drawn them together in a Chicago diner all those years ago. Bedroom? He suggested against her lips. The girls are occupied for at least another 20 minutes, Sophie said with a mischievous smile. They made it to their bedroom, closing and locking the door with practiced efficiency. Over the years, they'd learned to be quick when necessary, to find moments for intimacy in the chaos of raising two active daughters. But they'd also learned that the physical aspect of their relationship, the thing everyone had been so concerned about, had only gotten better with time. Marcus knew exactly how to touch her now, knew every spot that made her gasp, every angle that made her see stars. Sophie knew how to move with him, how to communicate what she needed, how to drive him wild with just a look. The size difference that had seemed like such an obstacle in the beginning had become part of their intimacy, part of what made their physical connection unique and perfect for them. I love you, Marcus murmured against her skin as they moved together, their bodies fitting in ways they'd spent years perfecting. Still the best decision I ever made, choosing you. Same, Sophie gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders as pleasure built. Best decision ever. Later, as they lay tangled together in the afterglow, listening to their daughter's laughter drifting through the window, Sophie thought about their journey, about the warnings, the doubts, the very real concerns people had raised. About the wedding night when they'd proven everyone wrong, about the pregnancies that had been difficult but worth every moment, about the family they'd built against all odds. Do you ever regret it? She asked Marcus. Fighting so hard for us when we could have just walked away, found easier relationships? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sophie could feel him thinking, really considering the question. Never, he said finally. Not once. Easy doesn't mean better, Sophie. We had to work for this. Had to fight for it. Had to prove everyone wrong, including sometimes ourselves. But that work, that fight, it made us stronger. It made what we have more precious because we know exactly what it cost and what it's worth. He rolled to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. You're the love of my life. Not despite the challenges, but including them. Every difficult moment taught us something. Every obstacle we overcame brought us closer. I wouldn't trade that for all the easy relationships in the world. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. I love you so much. I love you too. Now and forever. The girls burst into their room moments later, too excited about Maya's new basketball move to remember to knock, and Sophie and Marcus separated quickly, laughing at the interruption that was so typical of their life. Daddy, you have to come see. Maya insisted. I finally got the crossover you've been teaching me. Marcus looked at Sophie, asking permission without words. Go, she said, smiling. I'll start dinner. She watched from the kitchen window as Marcus worked with Maya in the driveway, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he demonstrated techniques, Grace trying to copy them despite being several years younger. This was their life. Chaotic, imperfect, full of interruptions and challenges and moments that didn't go as planned. But it was theirs, built on a foundation of love and trust, and the willingness to figure things out together. That night, after the girls were in bed and the house was quiet, Sophie sat down at her computer. She'd been thinking about their story for a while, about how many people had doubted them, how many couples might be facing similar concerns about compatibility and difference. She opened a new document and began to type. Everyone said it wouldn't work. They said he was too big. I was too small. They said we came from different worlds, that the logistics were impossible, that we were setting ourselves up for failure and heartbreak. And you know what? They weren't entirely wrong. It wasn't easy. There were challenges we had to overcome, conversations we had to have, moments when we had to choose each other over what was comfortable or expected. But here's what they didn't understand. Love isn't about finding someone who's easy. It's about finding someone who's worth the effort. It's about two people deciding that their differences are less important than what brings them together. It's about patience and communication and the willingness to figure it out, even when everyone says you can't. She wrote about their first meeting, about the wedding night, about the pregnancies and the children and the life they'd built. She wrote about the doubts and the fears and the moments when it would have been easier to walk away. But she also wrote about the joy, the love, the absolute rightness of two people who chose each other despite everything. When she finished, several hours later, Sophie read through what she'd written. It wasn't polished, wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was their truth. "What are you working on?" Marcus asked, coming up behind her to read over her shoulder. Sophie leaned back against his chest. "Our story. I thought maybe someone out there needs to hear it. Someone who's being told their relationship won't work because of size or background or any of the million reasons people find to doubt love." Marcus read in silence, and Sophie could feel his breathing change as he got to certain parts. When he finished, he wrapped his arms around her. "It's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's real." Sophie posted the story on a blog she'd created just for this purpose, not expecting much response. But within days, her inbox was flooded. Messages from women in relationships with men significantly taller or larger than them, asking for advice on intimacy. Messages from interracial couples who faced similar doubts about compatibility. Messages from people who'd been told their relationships didn't make sense, asking how she and Marcus had made it work. She answered each one thoughtfully, sharing not just the highlights but the real work of their relationship. The conversations about boundaries and comfort. The patience Marcus had shown on their wedding night. The difficult pregnancies and the decisions they'd made together. The ongoing communication that kept their physical relationship healthy and satisfying. One message stood out. It was from a young woman named Jennifer, barely 22, who'd been dating a professional football player for 6 months. "Everyone keeps telling me it won't work," she wrote. "My friends say he's too big for me, that I'll get hurt, that professional athletes can't be trusted. His teammates make jokes about breaking me. I love him so much, but I'm terrified. How did you get past the fear?" Sophie thought carefully about her response. "The fear never completely goes away," she wrote back. "Even now, 15 years later, there are